Hello again. So the African Union Peace and Security Council says it's concerned about the growing number of African governments hosting foreign military bases on the continent. Around 13 foreign countries have a military presence in Africa. This has raised several issues, including the lack of monitoring of weapons to and from these bases. We speak more on this with international relations expert Professor Anthoni Van Nieuwkerk from the Wits School of Governance. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us. Is there cause for concern with so many countries on the continent hosting these foreign military bases?
Yeah, well, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity. I think if we in Africa were able to maintain peace and security ourselves, then we wouldn't have had this influx of foreign military on the continent, which means there's a problem somewhere. Let me quickly say that there are three main reasons why a external party, a country in the international community would consider sending troops or soldiers or defense force personnel to Africa. The first one is peacekeeping, and there's a number of peacekeeping missions under the United Nations flag on the continent with participation from many international community members. The second one is there are many bilateral arrangements between governments around training and capacity building, but also fighting terrorism or violent extremism and crime and so on, which is also okay. The third one is where we should be concerned, and that is external parties enter the continent and they send soldiers and defense force personnel for their own particular self-interest. And that is of two kinds. It's either a geostrategic motivation or it's for commercial purposes. And I think the latter one, this category of self-interest, is the one that we should be concerned about.
Right. So when going through these motivations, let's look at peacekeeping. You have a country like Sudan, South Sudan, for instance, where there's instability, and a number of countries on the continent where there's instability. So you ask yourself what it is that they are doing exactly.
Yeah. So the peacekeeping part for me is less of a problem than the other two that I've listed, because there's an agreement, on the level of the United Nations and the level of the African Union, and there's a unique partnership between the UN and the AU to provide for a process whereby troop contributing countries send personnel into UN managed or overseen peacekeeping operations in countries such as Sudan, Darfur, Libya, Somalia, Mali, the DRC, and others. And I think that's generally accepted. And the AU is quite clear and on record saying that as Africans we have the will to make and keep the peace, but not always the means to do so. So that international effort that's coordinated by the United Nations, I think, and by the Security Council in particular, where South Africa has a seat this year, makes a lot of sense. So that is a form of international cooperation for the common good.
So when we look at the issue of self-interest, by no stretch of the imagination is this an accusation, but we have a problem with access to weapons on the continent, and hence that is also fueling the conflict that we see on the continent. Could it be that the proliferation of these weapons that we find on the continent are because self-interest has to be served here? There has to be, some sort of control that is exerted by these foreign powers.
Yeah, no, so this business of self-interest is really problematic for us as Africans. I mean, the first subcategory there that I identify is geostrategic. And geostrategic would refer to interest particularly in the Horn of Africa, where many foreign powers have set up military bases in the smallest country that you can find on the continent, which is Djibouti. And unfortunately, there are, I think, 6 or 7 military bases now with thousands of foreign troops. And they are all there for a particular reason, which is the dynamic of the Middle East and the flow of oil and other resources around the Horn of Africa. So you find the presence of foreign troops in Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa, where there's heavy political tension, and Africa is simply being used as a base to position these foreign powers. The same goes for, it's even disturbing if you think that idyllic Indian Ocean islands, the Seychelles, Mauritius, and so on, are being used, or I can even say abused, by very powerful foreign forces, the French, the Americans, the Indians, who simply use these as parking spaces to put their foreign intelligence and their ears on the ground, because they've got other fish to fry. They worry about the Russians and the Chinese moving around the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. And then the last thing I need to say is that there's hypocrisy at play as well. The big five in the Security Council, who are supposed to look after peace and security on our behalf, are also the world's biggest arms dealers and arms traders. And where there's a conflict in Africa, on the one hand, they say we will bring personnel to keep the peace, but with the other hand, they buy and sell weapons to all sorts of interested parties in the conflict. And often it's there's no scruples in international arms trade. And for this reason, we find thousands of troops and foreign interests in Africa exploiting a very delicate and difficult situation for us as Africans, because you might recall I said at the beginning, we have the political will often, but not the means to make sure that our people can live in peace and security.
Unfortunately, and quite interestingly, the African Union has declared 2020 the year of silencing the guns, just where bilateral agreements are concerned. Do we see African countries, maybe a tit-for-tat situation, where we also send over some of our military, troops? Do we have military bases in the West?
That's a naughty question. With the violence in America, Trump might, benefit from peacemaking and peacekeeping efforts by us as Africans. Of course, we've got lots of experience, but there's no way that the dominant West, or let me expand that to the dominant Chinese, the Russians, and the Europeans, there's no way that they would counter or countenance an interference in their backyard. But they see it fit to interfere in our efforts, in our business. Let me quickly say on a more serious note, Africans participate in international peacekeeping operations and missions elsewhere in the world. But again, it's under the UN flag, the so-called blue helmets, and that is very strictly controlled and regulated. What Africans don't do is go to South America or North America or to Australia and exploit natural resources and provide them with weapons of war. And I must put a footnote to that dramatic sentence. Some countries, like South Africa, has an arms industry, and we do sell arms and ammunition to other countries in conflict. The Middle East comes to mind. You will find ammunition being used in that very tragic situation in Yemen, via second and third parties. Our arms and ammunition are used there. And I don't think that is a healthy situation. There's the problem of ethics of selling weapons. But in general, Africa doesn't interfere with the world's conflicts. The world interferes with Africa's conflicts, and often it's done for their own self-interest.
And therein lies the problem. Thank you for your time this afternoon. International relations expert, Professor Anthoni Van Nieuwkerk.